Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us this week on Market Journal. It has been a wild week for much of the state, so hopefully everybody has been staying safe, so settle in. We've got a good show for you this week. And we're going to start things off today by taking a look at the cattle markets with Mike Briggs. And a big thanks to Mike for taking the time to talk with us this week. Like many of us, he had to shovel out from the snow, but he also still has a feed yard of cattle to take care of, so pulling double duty there. Lots to talk to him about this week. He joined me by phone, and I began by getting an idea of what his day-to-day looks like since the grain rally and the winter weather is adding even more volatility to the cattle markets.
This is the snowiest January on record. Well, in the feed yard industry, we never need that. It really has played havoc with my pen conditions and played havoc with cattle performance and cattle health, and it's not very much fun. So that's added quite a few challenges that we didn't need because everything's harder to do in the winter anyway, and that's been a little difficult and a little disappointing.
I've heard you say before how having a large supply of beef and a large supply of cattle are different things, and we've seen it before with winters like this. That's going to take a lot of pounds off these animals.
Eventually it will. It hasn't as of yet, and that's because in my view, the Packer's got his foot on the brake as far as how many cattle he can process and what he can get done. And I think he's trying to do margin maintenance. He's trying to make this huge margin they're making in the area of $300 a head right now, and they're trying to drag that out as long as they can because I think we have 45 to maybe on the outside 60 days worth of pretty good supplies of fat cattle, and then it's going to get real thin real fast, and they know it. They see these feed yards every week, and they're aware of that. That's what I kind of believe is going on. But eventually this will help fix the problem of pounds because there won't be so many extra pounds of beef. But then it's going to make a situation worse than that. There's not going to be enough pounds of beef because there aren't enough cattle, I believe. If corn price stays high, these weights will, not only because of the weather, but because of corn price, if corn price stays high, these weights are going to drop. You're not going to see 15, 16, 1,700 pound cattle anymore, and that's really going to drop the beef supply because you're putting on less pounds for every animal you send to the plant.
So obviously margins are bad right now. Give us an idea of just how bad.
Well, some margins are negative at this point in time. Now we haven't sold cattle at more than $1.12 for 9 months now, and you cannot make money on cattle that are priced under $1.12. That's just almost impossible. The only way you make money there is you beat the rancher down on his price down to 85 cents, which there's no such thing as 85-cent feeder cattle anymore. So it's been very tough in the feeding industry. Some of that's of our own doing because we still allow the packer too much of a captive supply as percentage of cattle sold. We really need to knock that off one of these days. But until we can gain some leverage on the packer, he's going to have a big margin, and we're not. That's the simple of it right there.
All right, Cattle on Feed report was last Friday. Any surprises in that report?
Well, there was. And as far as supplies, we actually overplaced what the guesses were, and that kind of surprised me a little bit. But having said that, the market showed you a little bit of profitability there in December if you went and bought some cattle. And that was before corn really got out of hand. I mean, it's kind of steadily gotten out of hand, but it really got out of hand the last part of December, first part of January. But anyway, the market showed you a little bit of profitability. So if you own your corn, you want to hedge your cattle, or however you want to do that, you can show a little paper margin. So people placed a lot of cattle. I did too.
And Mike, when we air this, the cattle inventory report will have just been released. Any guesses as to what we might see?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see if your cow herd got a little smaller because we have a growing drought in the western part of the country. And so the first thing people do, they take the old cows and they take them to town. And I think you're going to see some of that. And if this drought in the west persists, you're going to see more of it. Maybe we'll see some adjustments in the calf crop number as it going down. like we're talking about. So that might be interesting to see. We all know our total beef supply is up, and thank God we've got great demand. We've got great export demand. We've got great domestic demand. And this was through a pandemic. You would have never guessed this in a million years. And it's almost hard for me to conceptualize. And thank you, the American consumer and all the export people, because in my mind, when I roll into the store and chicken and pork are almost free, and they're paying for beef. They're paying the premium for the beef because they're getting the quality they deserve and the quality they feel is just for what they're paying. And that's fantastic. Now, if we could get a little margin from the retailer and the packer down to this side, we could all be happy.
We'll have analysts on the show sometimes that'll have these tried and true marketing strategies that they'll follow for certain times of the year. So my question is, do you have any of those strategies? And if so, is the market that we're seeing right now causing you to rethink any of those strategies?
That's a really good question. Now, typically, I always try to have animals for April, May, June, because that's grilling season, that's Memorial Day, it's right when they're starting to gather beef for 4th of July, Father's Day, all that stuff. If you don't have cattle ready in that time frame, I think, in my mind, you're making a mistake. There's times of the year to stay away from. One of those times is right now, and I'm right in the middle of it with a bunch of cattle to sell. Well, why did I do that? Well, because there was margin to be had then, and it looked pretty good, and then we got a faulty corn report, and then we made a mistake, and all of a sudden corn takes off, and if you weren't really paying attention, and I wasn't, you kind of get caught looking a little stupid here. But January and February are two poorest beef demand months of the year. It's not really a good time to have cattle to sell. And then after Labor Day in September and maybe the first part of October, market is almost always awful. It just, after Labor Day, our beef demand just falls off the table. So I try pretty hard to stay away from those. I try to have all of my spring cattle out of here by no later than the 20th of June. This year, you might be able to extend that out a little bit, because I think we'll have tremendous beef demand right into the 4th of July. That's kind of my two deals. I like November, December for cattle marketing. I like April, May, June. Do not like Jan, Feb. I don't like September, October, and those are determined by what beef demand typically is.
Next week, we'll be joined by Scott Irwin from the University of Illinois. Next up, almost every farm or ranch operation deals with semi-trucks and farm equipment traveling on public roadways. So how do you protect your equipment in case of an accident? Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has the story.
Liability is important for all farm and ranch operators to consider. Nebraska Extension Educator Jessica Groskopf says there's a few different ways to reduce liability prior to an accident.
So there's several ways that we can reduce liability. And the first way is to make sure that our drivers have background checks and that we've maintained our vehicles and then we're following transportation regulations. You should also have an insurance policy, both for the vehicles as well as an umbrella policy for your operation. And then also you might want to consider something like an entity to place some of those higher risk assets into.
When it comes to commercial driver's licenses, Jessica says it's not necessarily needed for Nebraskans.
So Nebraska is a part of MAP 21, which is a law that exempts vehicles with farm license plates from requiring a commercial driver's license. So farmers and ranchers actually do not need a CDL for those farm plated vehicles.
But operators should have two types of insurance to help protect them.
First is a regular vehicle policy, and the second one that they should look at is an umbrella policy for catastrophic accidents. So one is specifically for the crash and the other is the additional liability should you be sued, that you have a larger policy that would then cover your operation.
Finally, Jessica says creating a farm entity is a great way to protect your personal assets and separate them from those of the farm or ranch operation.
We get a lot of questions about whether or not equipment and semi-trucks should be placed in some sort of an entity like an LLC. And what that does is it separates one's personal assets from those on the farm. And that can be an important tool if you're saying, this is the business entity. So if there is an accident, what happens is the entity would be sued and your personal assets would be separate from that. One of the challenges, though, is that you need to consider what assets are placed into that entity. So, for example, you might just have an entity just for the vehicles that are going over the road, but know that that entity has to be operated as a business, and your organization papers will state what that means. And most of the time that means that they need their own checking account, that they need to pay their own expenses, and that they need to host annual meetings. And so as we look at that, we need to make sure that we're doing the things in that, usually it's like an operating agreement, so that if we get sued, the person suing us can't look at our entity and say, well, they're operating that like it's in their personal side. So we really need to make sure that that business entity is operated separately from the personal finance. Otherwise, there's no point to having that entity, because it transfers the liability.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. If you'd like more information, you can visit farm.unl.edu or contact your local extension office. Next up, a couple weeks ago on the show, we talked with extension educator Glennis McClure about determining your 2021 crop budgets for the upcoming growing season. To help make that easier, Glennis is part of the team involved in developing the Ag Budget Calculator. It's still in its testing phase, but allows an easier way to customize those crop budgets. Glennis joined me to talk about how you can be a part of it.
So yes, our new Ag Budget Calculator is continuing in development, and it's really exciting for us that we've been able to allow producers now to register to test the program so they can use the program, test it, and we're getting ready to get some feedback from them on how that's going. So we do invite people to take a look at the new Ag Budget Calculator. And right now it's designed so it will do everything that our current budgets do with the Excel. And one of the additions that we have right now too with the Ag Budget Calculator is that you can add in revenue, whereas our budgets in the past, and for a long time as we've done those in Excel and there's PDF versions, we have not had the revenue side of things in that program, and now we do. So I do invite folks that if they're interested to contact us and let us know so that we can send you the link and you can start utilizing and testing the ABC program.
Glennis, what's been the feedback thus far from producers who have used the calculator?
Well, right. Well, yes, we have producers that have taken a look at it and have really thought this is going to be really wonderful. One of the pieces with this that we're going to add is a whole farm version, or a component where you can basically bring all of your crop and livestock enterprises together eventually and do some reconciliation of overhead expenses and so on, or all of your, let's say your fuel prices, all your different crop budgets, there's different fuel usages and expenses that go into that. So if you take a look at all of your budgets, all of your enterprise budgets, is that fuel cost really what you are paying generally on an average year? And so there's going to be some really, I guess, unique things with that. And also we heard from producers that sort of the mobile technology also is a thing. We believe that sitting down at your computer is the best way to start using and testing the program, but you'll be able to access the program with your mobile device. And so when you're out in the field or let's say you're at your supplier and you want to take a look at, well, this is the price I entered for this seed or this chemical. How does that differ from what they just told me here? So you can actually go in and take a look at what you actually budgeted and how things are turning out for you through the year.
And it seems to me, just hearing you talk about it, that not only will this calculator be a real time saver, but it'll also help to look at things in a more accurate way. And I think that in turn is going to save producers money and help their bottom line.
Right. Well, and as we said, the budgets, the way we've always done them, are really guidelines. And we understand that all farming operations are unique. And so when you have the opportunity to really customize and let's say put in your machinery complement, put in the information of what did you purchase that machine for? How long are you keeping it? That type of thing goes into this program. And so you're going to get a better idea of what it's really costing you to operate, to do all those field operations and so on, versus what we have sort of static in our programs right now.
If you're interested in learning more about the Ag Budget Calculator, head on over to farm.unl.edu/ABC. Next up, one Nebraska irrigation study is trying to establish the overall center pivot health across the state. Initial findings from monitoring data from 60 Nebraska pivots found 88% of those pivots were operating below the required regulator inlet pressure for more than 5% of their operating time. If that's the case, Nebraska Extension educator Troy Ingram says that farmers are facing crop uniformity issues and giving up yield potential. You can read more about this study in the Irrigation Extra insert in the January Nebraska Farmer. And next up, for many producers, it's time again to start thinking about recertification for pesticide application. The pandemic forced the cancellation of many in-person training sessions. Now, Nebraska Extension is gearing up for the 2021 Pesticide Safety Training season. Market Journal's Bill Dodd caught up with an Extension Assistant Pesticide Safety Educator to find out what producers need to know.
And there was no control because
the Pesticide Safety Education program's main focus is to ensure quality training for Nebraska's current and prospective applicators. While 2020 proved to be a year like none other, with the onset of the COVID-19 outbreak canceling multiple in-person training events, the Nebraska Department of Agriculture actually offered license extensions to applicators who were unable to recertify due to the pandemic. Currently, Nebraska Extension is preparing for multiple in-person and virtual events to help ensure those producers are able to recertify this year.
Last year, during the when things were kind of shutting down for COVID-19, the Agriculture Department actually issued a license extension that some folks were able to take advantage of. And so what that did was recertified their license on the condition that they take training during this year, since they were unable to do that training last year. And so those folks, we want to remind them that they need to take their training this year to make that license valid. If they don't take that training, then that license is going to be kind of nullified, and they'll have to go through the process again. So,
for many prospective applicators out there, getting initial certification may seem daunting. However, Nebraska educators are prepared to give you the instruction you'll need to meet your goals.
It's going to cover a lot of the what we call the core competencies, or the general standards for being a safe and effective pesticide applicator. And so it's gonna cover everything from personal protective equipment that you should wear, to understanding how to read a label, to specific risks that products might pose to groundwater or other plants in the environment, or human health. And then on the recertification side, we try and focus more on sort of emerging issues in a particular category of pest control or topics of interest, and also the laws and the regulations that kind of dictate all of this. Those change from time to time too, as policies change, and so it's also very important. Those folks are in there every 3 years recertifying to make sure that they're aware of any changes to those laws or regulations. And so that's a big part of it as well.
Series of lines going out.
Many restricted use products require training for application. When applying these restricted use products, there are a number of rules to follow. And these guidelines are typically put in place to ensure your safety, as well as the well-being of the environment.
And so restricted use products require that a person take training and have a pesticide license to purchase and apply those chemicals. Misuse of pesticides can result in acute toxicity, which would be getting sick, vomiting, if you're exposed to a large dose of the pesticide. It can also lead to what they call chronic exposure, which is more long-term health detriments that might show up years or decades later, such as cancers. In terms of the environment, we want to look at protecting the wildlife, non-target plants, trees out in the environment, and also the water supply, both groundwater and surface water, can be negatively affected by pesticides. It's really important because it trains those people how to protect human health, their health, the health of others, as well as the environment from potential harm from using these pesticides.
For those that weren't able to recertify last year due to the pandemic, now is a perfect time to get signed up. For most private applicators, the training session should be enough for certification. For commercial applicators, on the other hand, a scheduled test may be the final step in the certification process.
Every 3 years, if you want to renew that license, you're going to have to attend recertification training to maintain that license. And recertification on the commercial, non-commercial side doesn't involve retaking exams for most categories. You just sit through the training. Upon completing our training, and it sort of varies by type of license you're going for, but after you've sort of established yourself as a certified applicator, then the Nebraska Department of Agriculture will actually get in touch with you to get your actual license based on that certification. Commercial applicators who are looking to get their license for the first time actually have to pass at least two exams administered by the Agriculture Department. And so passing scores on those exams is what's going to certify them to get that license. On the private applicator side, it's a little different. Basically just going through the training is going to give them that certification.
If you are due to recertify this year, now is the perfect time to contact your local extension office and find out more about this year's opportunities for pesticide application certification. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. If you're in need of recertification this year, you're encouraged to contact your local extension office to learn about training opportunities in your area. You can also check out the Market Journal website for more info. Finally today, we're going to get a look at the weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, this week was one for the record books. Tell us what we can expect in the days ahead.
Well, Troy, what a system we had. Widespread record snowfall on a daily basis reported frequently across eastern Nebraska. Good widespread 12-inch plus snowfall totals, basically surrounding much of east central, portions of central and southeast Nebraska. And then if you expand out of there, we had a considerable area of 8+ inches of snow, essentially from Norfolk southward to the Kansas border and then westward as we got into the Tri-Cities area. As we got into western Nebraska, unfortunately, we just did not get much in the way of precipitation. But there is hope as we look forward in the forecast. There are several systems that may finally give us what we have been desperately needing in western Nebraska with a good snowfall. But more importantly, with a system that is expected to cross the state, just to the south of the state today, and the rain that is associated with it, there's a distinct possibility that many of the residential areas in our larger cities in the eastern part of the state with the snowpacked roads are going to turn into an icy mess before we start to see a warming trend for a few days before we turn our attention to another major storm coming in next week. So let's take a look at the upper air miles and see how things are going to progress. And as we look today, we have yet another system with the upper air low center just to the southeast of the Nebraska. Little energy in the southern stream pivoting around that. It's going to help wrap moisture around the low pressure system that is in north central portions of Missouri, and that will allow the spreading of precipitation into the eastern part of the state. Primarily the focus for the heaviest moisture will be across extreme southeastern Nebraska, but we should see light moisture across much of eastern Nebraska in the form of rain up to freezing rain as you go farther toward the north. As we go to tomorrow, that low pressure passes by us. We can start to get high pressure building in. Even though we do show a low across the front range of the Rocky Mountains, there's no moisture to speak of. We'll start to see that warmer air spread into our region, particularly across the western part of the state, where we're probably going to be looking at the 40s. But as we get into Monday, we start to see this ridge spread closer to our region, and that will allow much warmer temperatures to spread in, at least to the western one-third of the state, where we could hit the 50-degree mark. We'll be looking at low 40s south and upper 30s to the north, and we will see nothing in the way of precipitation. As we get into Tuesday, that ridge starts to slide toward the east. Another trough starts to make its way into the western United States, although I think the GFS is a little fast on this. We start to see the low starting to develop across western South Dakota, and we see a widespread area of snowfall across the western United States. But by the time we get into Wednesday, this trough really deepens. A lot of cold air behind it, a lot of moisture being streamed northward with two pieces of energy ejecting out in a low pressure system. Bad place for it in that Kansas City area at the surface. That's going to bring a lot of moisture up and wrap it around, and this is a classic signal for heavy snowfall across the western part of the state. And then the cold air comes in behind it on Thursday. I think we may be just about 24 hours early on this system. I think Thursday is more of the time frame for this, but bottom line is a major storm is going to come in. Be prepared for it. Most of the moisture, according to GFS, will start to move out of the region as we get into the day on Thursday. And then the real cold air starts to rush behind it, so we're going to get an Arctic blast that's going to cover much of the upper plains and the Midwest region. Doesn't look like we're going to see much in the way of precipitation with this system, but we're going to see some bitter cold temperatures, at least for a couple days, as most of the major cold slides to the east and develops a well-wound-up system over the northeastern United States. As we go even farther into the future, 8 to 14-day forecast is bringing a much more colder area in as we get from the 10th to the 15th with another surge of cold air, and this one looks like it may bring some snowfall to the western part of the state once again. And in terms of precipitation, although they're shown above normal precipitation to our east, based on a lot of latest trends I'm seeing, we may be able to back this up a little bit. So ranchers, be aware that as we get into the middle of the month, particularly after these two storm systems move through the region, we are looking at a very significant likelihood that we will see Arctic air intrude into the region. And we may be dealing, especially from the Dakotas and Minnesota, with highs that may not break the 0-degree mark. So be aware that this system is basically going to start to install some cold air into our region, which is a trend that we've seen for the last decade, very cold February to end the winter. So Troy, overall, a couple more systems that we have to pay attention to.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.